somewhere, look up, see if that username and password actually exists. If so, verify that the password matches, hopefully doing like password hashing to make sure we're not like storing the password in plain text, looking up that user's information, and then usually what would happen is the application would drop like a cookie into the web browser to keep track of the user and say, hey, this user already logged in, they're associated with this particular session ID or something, and we've logged the user in. Now, this is basically how authentication, this like a lot of people, including myself, cut their teeth on building this type of thing, like in PHP, or in my case, classic ASP, some really, really bad code that I never want to look at again from like 15 years ago. But you can do this on your web server if you want. The industry has been moving a little bit away from kind of doing this in a homegrown way, and I'll explain why. So this doesn't have anything to do with OAuth yet, but I wanted to kind of set the stage for explaining what we're going to be comparing against. This is like the most use case. There's a couple of downsides of doing authentication inside of your app, kind of like in a homegrown way. Like I just described, is that you're on the hook for all of the security and maintenance that goes around with maintaining an authentication system. So if it's just your server code hitting a database somewhere and making sure the user's password matches, aware of like when the best practices in the security industry change around password hashing or storing user information securely, or you have HIPAA coming down the wire, or now GDPR coming down the wire, you have to be aware of like how these things change. And there's quite a bit of maintenance involved in making sure that your authentication system is still working. So at risk of giving away the punchline just a little bit, OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect are kind of some industry best practices that the industry as a whole is moving towards to try to make this problem a little bit easier to solve. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So let's explain how these protocols work and what they are first, and then I'll come back to that. So I want to acknowledge that there's a ton of really confusing information about OAuth online. If you try to Google what is OAuth, or how does OpenID Connect work, or how do I use OAuth 2.0, you're probably going to find extremely confusing information. When I started learning about this a couple years ago, when I got into like the web security space, it was really confusing for me too. And I still get confused sometimes, even today. I think the guys who wrote the spec still get confused as well. The thing that you'll find online, and why it's so confusing, is that for mainly two reasons. There's a lot of terminology and jargon that's just like really dense, really obscure, and like really just like very OAuth 2.0 specific. So the problem is that if you are a newbie, or you don't really understand how this works yet, and you Google to try to figure out how it works, what you're probably going to find is a lot of information that talks to you as if you already understand all these terms, already understand all the jargon. If you don't know what those